Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first live chat in our series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships Program, also known as STPF. My name is Murav Sarwar. I'm the recruitment director for the fellowship. You all have most likely heard from me plenty already, but in my role, I mainly serve as a resource and cheerleader for you to successfully navigate the application process and help and understand all things STPF. And also have the privilege of moderating our live chat today, so thank you for being here. This live chat series is an opportunity for you to ask STPF fellows your questions. And so that we hope through these chats, you'll kind of like see how the fellowship can impact policy while also, transforming your career and hearing from the folks who actually did it. But yeah, let's do some housekeeping items. To put today's session in context, we're hosting one chat each month during the application season. You're more than okay to join us for one, some, or all of them. I'm also really excited to share that the next chat in our series is a little bit unique since we'll be doing a deep dive on the Judicial Branch Fellowship on June 27th. This chat will be with fellows who are placed in the Judicial Branch. And if you're thinking about applying to that program area, you're very encouraged to apply. We're doing this chat because it's the 10th year anniversary of that program area. So special edition, unique drops, very excited to be able to offer that this year. So that will be there for June 27th. Outside of that chat, each chat will still focus on a unique aspect of the fellowship experience. And you'll get to hear from different STPF fellows, right? I think one of the things is that a lot of fellows have different experiences working in different agencies. And so trying to expose you to all this experience is something that we want to do here as well. So each chat should be a little bit different. And today we're going to focus on why pursuing a science policy career through our fellowship program can be a way to kickstart your career in science policy. In case you haven't heard, you probably have heard from me a lot about this, but the application is open and it closes on November 1st. So for those who are applying or thinking about applying this year, thank you. We're so glad that you made it to this chat. This session will help you understand day-to-day life as a fellow, as well as good contributions that our fellows are making. And for those of you who may be a few years away from applying, it's great that you're here too. There are lots of ways to learn about and engage in science policy. And as you're thinking about what's next after your degree or what's next after you apply or before you apply, this is always a good chance to kind of get a better sense of what we do and what the program is about. But because so many of you are planning to apply now, I'd like to share a little overview of STPF. These fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy. For 2024, applicants can apply to 4 program areas: executive, legislative, judicial, and unique for this cycle, the Roger Revelle Fellowship. You can apply to 2 of these program areas. Fellowships are a paid 1-year full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. For a sense of timing, someone who applies in 2024 will be considered for a position in the fellowship class that runs from September of 2025 to August of 2026. Applicants must be U.S. citizens, hold a doctoral degree in the sciences, social sciences, or engineering, and cannot be a full-time federal or AAAS employee. Those of you with a master's in engineering plus 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. All of you here are representing many different backgrounds, from biological and physical sciences to social sciences and computer sciences and engineering. The diversity of discipline is actually really important for us. Federal agencies and offices that host fellows are looking for a wide range of backgrounds and skills. And so if you are a part of that degree, a part of our eligible degrees, no matter what science you're in, you're so welcome to join us, and we need you to be fellows. So thank you all for being here again. And now to the purpose of today's session is to actually chat with fellows. So ask questions. To do that, click the question box in your menu and type your question in. And if you like, you can indicate the person or people to whom your question is directed to. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can today. And I'm happy to introduce you to our fellows joining us. So Dr. Angelica Zamora-Durant is serving the Office of Energy Jobs at the U.S. Department of Energy in her first year as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow. She's currently working to support policy design, analysis, and data integration to develop workers, especially women and minorities, In the energy sector, Angelica received her bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Virginia and both her master's degree and PhD in biological oceanography, marine biology from the Florida Institute of Technology, where she studied climate change impacts to coastal ecosystems. Angelica's experience working for an environmental consulting firm at the intersection of research, education, and community engagement fueled her passion for tackling environmental and climate justice issues. Angelica is motivated by facilitating policy efforts that develop inclusive and equitable solutions toward a clean energy transition. Dr. Alexandra Phillips is the first AAAAS STPF Fellow in Climate Science. She currently works for Senator Alex Padilla, where she acts as a policy advisor on environmental issues relating to climate and energy. During her fellowship, she has written legislation to regulate fusion energy, establish low carbon fuel standards, upgrade oceanographic research vessels, improve atmospheric river forecasting, study equity in national park system reservations, and more. Before her work in the Senate, Alex worked as a professional science communicator for UC Santa Barbara, where she also did her postdoctoral research and undergraduate studies. She holds a PhD in geochemistry from the California Institute of Technology. Following her fellowship, Alex will be returning to UC Santa Barbara at the Brennan School, where she will join the faculty to teach and research environmental communication and policy. In her free time, she enjoys FaceTiming with her cat, Tuna, who's still in California, and sprinting on the Peloton at her apartment gym to Taylor Swift music. And lastly, Dr. Vince Tejas-Saputra is the Director of Scientific Communications at the American Lung Association, where he helps to the story of impact of lung disease research to patients, donors, and lawmakers who support the organization. Prior to the American Lung Association, Dr. Tejas-Saputra was a AAAS Science Technology Policy Fellow in the Office of Legislative and Public Affairs at the National Science Foundation. As a former college athlete turned scientist and classically trained operatic singer turned science communicator, he encourages all budding scientists to purposely blur the lines between work and play. Thank you all for joining us. So before we get into questions from the audience, I think we're still waiting on Angelica, which she might pop in here sooner. But until then, if I can ask you all to quickly introduce yourself outside of the bios, but also what advice would you give to scientists who are interested in working in policy, and why should those scientists consider applying for STPF? Vince, would you mind starting us off? I think we have you muted. Okay. There we go. We're on.
Thanks so much for having me. Vince Tejas-Saputra. I'm actually in DC on vacation here, but I would say, you know, we all spend a lot of time in the lab, and we got really good at one thing. And I think when you're looking at stuff that is not directly bench lab related or whatever your field is, whatever terminology you use, you're able to learn new things very fast. And science policy is no exception. Of course, it's scary to step outside of something that you've been spending 10, 12, 20 years in. But it's the people like us who we serve. You know, many of us came to the fellowship because of a different president. Like you know, during my term, or you know, they wanted to affect science, big S science. You know, affecting how money is given out, or what the priorities are for federal funding. And so, you know, to me, it's a way to serve your scientific community. And that's my son Lewis, who would not go down for a nap, so he may be chiming in. But happy to be here and happy to answer any questions.
I think we're muted, Alex.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that this fellowship is really amazing. I kind of think I applied for a couple of reasons. First, I just had always wanted to experience what the Hill was like. And as a scientist, it's a really unique way to come onto the Hill. I did my research in kind of fundamental science, and none of my training was in talking to policymakers. You know, it was kind of done in a vacuum. And it was a nice vacuum, but I felt like the work I was doing was a bit esoteric. I really wanted to see how to make a bigger impact in climate change. And so I applied for the fellowship, especially given the new positions that they have just for climate science, which have been great. And I really have enjoyed that the fellowship allows you to take fundamental research and make a bigger impact with it by communicating it to policy. I think that's a really great piece of the program. And the other thing is that I've always been really interested in using science to advance policy, but I felt like I didn't really know the language of policymakers. And in the fellowship so far, I kind of think of it as when you learn a new language, you really need an immersion program. Congress is really confusing, and until you're really in Congress for a year, you don't really understand all of the different ways to interact with policy. It's so much more than just writing bills. There's so many pieces of policy that I understand now that I just didn't have any understanding of before the fellowship. And so those are a couple of things that I think I was really looking for in the fellowship and that have definitely been delivered. And I'm happy to talk more about any of those types of things.
I think that's actually a perfect lead into a question that we just got, was how much policy experience did you have before applying? And it's something that a lot of folks will ask for, is like, do I need to be this policy expert going into the program? But we'd love to hear more about where you guys were at policy experience wise, and how that's like not changed so doing the fellowship.
Yeah, Vince, you want to go first? You said your wife works at EPA, so maybe you had a little bit more understanding of the government process.
So that was actually, so I had zero experience in policy. I think it's really important for people to know that. Everything that they got, like, I was like on the postdoc association board for my university, but that was the closest thing to like governance, community governance. And my wife does work for EPA, but I actually didn't meet her until after the fellowship. So as a result of it, she's not a fellow, but that's another story. I think like the orientation does a really great job of teaching you how, like, what to expect, but and then everybody's experience is so different. My experience in the executive branch at NSF is so different than what Alex is experiencing on the Hill, and it's a really good thing because in the end it's like the network of people that you have, and there's no dumb questions, and it's been asked many times before, and there's going to be different answers for all those questions. And so I think that's the cool part. Alex, you mentioned something about the language of policy. And that's something that you really don't learn until 6-7 months in, and even little things like how to respond to emails, or like when to stop by someone's desk or not, and then figuring out like how to navigate relationships within and outside your office to get something done. To me, at the NSF, I was I never applied to NSF funding. I was always in like the NIH lane, and I did that purposely because I wanted to talk about something other than lung disease, which my PhD was in, ironically, in 2019. 6 months later, we were all talking about lung disease. But the language that I could speak was academia, and so program officers, for the most part, are all either on loan from their universities or former professors. So having that common thread helped me navigate sort of bureaucracy and processes to get some of my projects moved ahead.
Yeah, I'll also say I had not very much policy experience. I do think it helps with the application to demonstrate a history of interest in policy. You don't necessarily need to know the language already or have done certain things, but expressing that you've been interested in taking actions that show your interest over your PhD, I think is really helpful. So, I was involved in my professional society. I went on some visit days. I had been in a congressional meeting before. I had organized some congressional meetings, but I didn't necessarily know very much about the policy world. Like, I had never written a bill and done all the things that I'm doing now. But I will say, however you can demonstrate interest can help you be a stronger applicant.
I think that also kind of goes into like what someone's asking here is like what makes a successful application, and what were some things that worked out for you, or what were the things that from your application that you thought were pretty strong. I think like a lot of things as like S&P talks to folks who are interested in applying, a lot of the motivations can differ, right, for people. And so for some folks, it's really just like, hey, I'm really burned out in academia, or I'm burned out here and I want to see what this is about. And while that's like understandable, but it's also being able to connect, like, how are you interested, and what about this fellowship is important to you, and like how can you show that you're a three-dimensional person that wants to really impact policy, right? And so To throw that back to you guys, like what were some of the things that you think made your application successful? Or what are areas of the application do you think some people can overlook?
Yeah, maybe Vince, you can talk about the executive and I can talk about the congressional.
Mine was all about big picture. Like I knew I was really good at science communication, not necessarily academically, but I was doing human research, and I was really good at communicating why it was important for human research volunteers. Hi, buddy. To be part of science, and I realized like there was this growing scientific misinformation and even disinformation, and this is even before COVID, right? And so I knew like my sphere was science communication, and then the pitch was how can that scale? What is the gap in whatever issue that you want to work on? How does my skill fit in that? And then and as you put it, like a three-dimensional person, that's to me that's what makes it such a unique thing, is that I did a lot of stuff, and in my bio I sort of talk about like I was a singer and I was an athlete, and like my PhD advisor said I was distracted, and that's true, but I think it made me a better person, maybe more interesting, and certainly I think a better citizen. And so coming into the fellowship, I wasn't just an expert in lung disease or just an expert in science communication, but when you go home, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a neighbor, and like we belong to these communities that we have a voice in. And I think to me that was the most important part, like actualizing the passions that we're good at work and at home, and to try and advance science as best as we can in these very specific government channels.
Yeah, that's all great advice. I think I'll echo what Vince was saying, and showcasing that you're a three-dimensional person is always great. I also felt like I had a lot of multifaceted interests and never fit into just the scientist box. And I think a lot of people at AAAS feel that way. So it's a place that really rewards that multidimensionality. I'd say in terms of some concrete things for the application, I definitely think weaving a story in about your experiences is really important, kind of showing how this is a logical next step for you in navigating your career and figuring out what you want to do and how you think policy is the next step. I also think it's helpful to be as specific as you can with some of your ideas. If you know that you might want to work at certain agencies or in certain offices, kind of give a little bit of color as to what you might be able to do to show that you've really researched it. And you can get that type of insight by talking to past fellows. I'd say that a lot of us have totally wide open inboxes. I think I talked to like 10 people that were navigating the application process last year, just walking them through some ideas for their application, editing their apps, looking at their resumes. And so don't feel afraid to reach out to past fellows, because it is one of those things that's like a hidden curriculum. You don't really know until you've gone through it. I'll also just give a shout out that all of my application materials are on my website. They're open access, so you can view a couple of examples. And I think other fellows are really happy to talk to you about that. But I would just make sure that you tell your story and don't be afraid to get specific.
And this isn't like I don't know if you all can hear me. I was able to join by phone.
Hey, Angelica.
Sorry about that.
No, you're all good. Welcome. I was hoping if you could also maybe quickly say if you could introduce yourself and then go into your response. Sorry, I'm just happy you're here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks for bearing with the technical difficulties, everyone. So my name's Angelica Zamora-Duran. I am a first-year fellow in the Department of Energy. I'm specifically working in the Office of Policy, and then within there in the Office of Energy Jobs. This is completely not aligned with my research background whatsoever, which was in marine biology. So I've definitely learned a whole lot. I've been able to, put some of what I did learn as far as like research and analysis. I'm using a lot of that right now. But I would say, expand your abilities, expand maybe your passions even, and explore something new through the fellowship is super fun. After the question that was just posed as to what, you would include in your application as far as your story goes, I think that's definitely true. Think about what are your passions, right? So in my research background, I was seeing a lot of issues with especially environmental justice problems. And then I learned a little bit more about, this administration's Justice 40 executive order. And so I tried to find a way to tell what I cared about, but also relate that to a policy that might address something that I see as an issue. And I think that helped.
I think one thing too that folks might be interested in is for folks who are just learning about our fellowship program and have kind of been going through their academic careers. How did you know that this was something that you wanted to pursue and it was to work in science policy, and kind of like how did you decide that the fellowship was a good thing to apply to based off where you guys were in your careers?
For me, I think I like finish. Everyone does it last second. You should start now, but I did in October, and it was I think it was, yes, buddy. I wrote 4 grants in October, and this was the 5th thing I wrote, and it was the only thing I was excited about. It's changed over the years, but it was only 1,000 words, and I talked about what I wanted to do, yes, buddy. But it wasn't until I did my interview and then moved on to the finalist phase where they got flown out that I was just like, whoa, this is amazing. Everyone's so smart. It was like a whole week around other really smart. It was like space camp, with other science nerds. But everybody had the same thread. Like most people were sort of tired of academia. Everyone had a little bit of a toxic story background, but everyone came to DC and was super inspired and inspired. And so to me, like that the community of fellows, the fellowship was really something that brought me in, and like I'm not going back to science, but I love my life where it is now.
Yeah, I think we touched on it before. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Angelica.
Oh, thanks. I think, that resonated well with me, that I knew I didn't want to pursue academia any further. I felt like it almost was kind of like a pigeonholing myself, right, where you're writing papers for the same 5 people to read. And so I just felt that the fellowship would be an opportunity to really expand your network beyond the kind of silos that academia can put you in. So that was what excited me.
Yeah, I guess I can give a slightly different perspective as someone who wasn't sure if I wanted to go back into academia or not after it, and I am transitioning back to an academic position now. So I guess I'll say the fellowship was really nice time in my career where I felt like I was kind of hitting a ceiling with what I wanted to do as a postdoc and as a science communicator, and I was ready for this challenge. And I think I had always had this kind of fantasy of what is it like to be on the Hill, right? Like where stuff is happening. You want to be in the room where it happens, like in Hamilton, and you just want to see what's happening behind closed doors, like an episode of West Wing, or it's actually much closer to Veep. But it's really fun. Like it's a very dynamic, fast-paced workplace where soon means in a couple of hours and not like in academics where it's a month or 2. And I just really wanted to experience that. And I don't think I would have gotten the academic job I have that I'm going to without this fellowship, because it's a bit of a pivot. It's more in science communication and science policy. And so the fellowship, I think, was the right moment in my career where I needed a challenge. And Congress, I think, definitely provides that challenge in being a science communicator at a different level than what I was experiencing just in academics before.
There was a question on how if the fellowship changed your interest in certain careers in policy, and it sounds like for all of you it did. To even if it doesn't mean going back directly in policy work, having that experience I think is so crucial in going back, right? I even when I talk to faculty members who've done the fellowship as well, and they'll go back to their home institutions and kind of leverage that policy experience, and that's always kind of like a cool full circle moment that happens much more often than you think, right? And I think a lot of fellows are able to speak to all the things you all just talked about.
If you work at an SF and score grants all day, you're going to be really good at writing grants. Great
right.
thing to have, if you're going back to academia.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the idea of like, policy for science, right? Of just kind of like ensuring that we can continue to keep doing the work that everyone is involved in and making sure that, like, we ultimately live in a better society than the one we left. So another question that we have is, and I think, we're in an election year, and I think this is definitely forefront for people who are applying this cycle, is how much, if at all, do politics impact your fellowship duty? So with the power shift, if it were to go from a Republican administration to a Democratic administration and vice versa. If you all can speak to that, you're more than welcome to. If not, that's also okay. But if you can, go if you want to take that question.
Yeah, I mean, just in Congress, like obviously politics impacts my day-to-day a lot, from everyday small things to thinking about the election for sure. So for fellows that are considering Congress for the next year, I think on this application cycle, it'll be a bit easier to understand, right? Because the election will have happened. You'll know if the Senate flipped, if the House flipped, and if the administration flipped. And so I don't really think for your guys' class, it'll be as big of a, turbulence as, the people that are going through their placements right now who are going to be placed and then have an election year. I will say, like in Congress, funding for offices in the House is 2 to 1. So if the House flips, Democratic offices will have 2 times the budget and will have way more staff. And so the main thing that kind of influences it for me when I'm thinking about this is when I was considering a job on the Hill afterwards, you're very acutely aware of all of the transitions that may or may not be happening on the Hill, like if people are going to be going to agencies or if offices are going to be hiring up or letting people go as, committee assignments and things like that shift. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit. I think it's probably very different in the executive branch.
It is really different in the executive branch. It's also really different in each placement. Like in the science agencies, depending on the topic you're working on, it may not affect you that much. And there is that saying that when you're in the executive branch, you serve at the pleasure. And so whoever is in the White House, your mission is to execute their policy. And so it does teach you. It teaches you a lot about patience and sort of like seeing the bigger picture. I think I would still rather be in an administration, like regardless of who the president is, I'd rather be in it doing something than outside of it doing nothing, right? Or complaining or just scrolling news. And that was a big part of me applying and coming to the fellowship was I wanted to feel like I was doing something instead of doom scrolling, which I think everyone was those years and now too.
I don't have much to add on this because I haven't been in a time period where the administration has changed and I've been working in the government. But I think anything to, really hone in on there is just that, especially in the executive branch, it's hard to remove federal employees. So a lot of the people that I'm working with or that are working in the federal government in the executive branch in general have been there for numerous years. And, though, they still have to put out the priorities of the administration, they continue to do good work. So no matter what, you'll be, impacting policy, you'll be imparting change. And like Vince said, it's just good to be in the room.
Yeah, and I think in Congress, like if you're in different administrations, the main thing for us is if you're working with the majority, you get to play offense. And if you're working with the minority, you're often playing defense. And so that can functionally change, but you're still going to select a member that you want to work with and whose values you align with.
On the flip side, another thing that folks are thinking about is when you move to DC and kind of like navigating that transition. There's a question on how connected you all feel with other fellows, and if you interact with them on a day-to-day basis or weekly basis, and if you all are social with each other or not. But we'll have to kind of like, I think Vince too also has like some fun alumni stuff that he gets involved with. So yeah, if you guys can speak to the social environment amongst the fellows and just moving to DC in general.
It's the best part. The community fellows is absolutely the best part. There's now probably over 4,000 former fellows who are like in very high levels of government and in nonprofits and academia. And so it's pretty amazing what my friends are doing in the White House or at the state, you know, like, and that's a really cool thing. I live in Chicago now. And so I think like the power of the name of the Science and Tech Policy, like AAAS Fellowship, sort of wanes a little bit outside of Washington D.C. But we've created, we found each other. There's fellows, former fellows everywhere in Chicago. There's probably like 8 to 15 of us who meet monthly and do our happy hours. When you're in the fellowship, or if you're in the DC area, every Friday there's a fellows happy hour, and so it's a great place to network. And so I think like made some of the best friends for life within the fellowship. And you know, one thing that you know, fellows will say to each other, like when you're applying to jobs and you put it out there into the fellows, where does anyone know anyone working at, you know, a DOE, you know, and then I'll send a text over and then find out what the skinny is, and then my resume goes to the top. You know, I'm not saying that it's a foregone conclusion that you get a job, but certainly like it certainly puts you a leg up on post fellowship, even like beyond years beyond your fellowship, like that still stays.
On the congressional side, I mostly hang out with the other congressional fellows, and I'd say the network is pretty great. We have a really active Slack group. We have a book club. No political books, it's only fun books. There's a separate political book club. It's really fun. I'd also say, you know, that they're very good friends. I think I hang out with them probably on a daily basis. I text someone who's a fellow, and probably on a weekly basis hang out with someone who's a fellow, which is great because we're all moving to DC with maybe not really knowing anyone here. I'll also say it's a huge asset in my job because I now have a contact in something like 40 different congressional offices. And so when I'm working on a bill, I have a bunch of different people to socialize the bill with. You know, we help each other get co-sponsors, we talk to each other about our ideas, and it's also a great network. You know, like what Vince was saying, even on the Hill, we have so many people here that used to be AAAS fellows or that have mentored a AAAS fellow. And it can be a really great way to kind of like ease into a new social network too, and finding those other AAAS fellows. You get to kind of let your guard down, be a little bit more of yourself, take off the mask of politics for a minute, and both be kind of nerdy scientists together, which is always really fun.
And the only thing I'll add in addition to all those is there's also the affinity group. So if you really are into, say, like, I don't know, knitting, I think is one of them. I think there's just a ton of different affinity groups that you're able to join as a fellow. And so you can kind of have that background with the rest of each other. If it's a little bit intimidating to join the huge happy hours and you don't really know what to talk about, although everyone's very nice and would be open to it, if you connect better, you know, talking about something that you know and like with someone else who also knows and likes that thing, then join the affinity groups that speak to you.
Yeah, I think like everything you're kind of all talking about, it goes back to the idea of like you're not applying for a job, right? Like you're doing a fellowship, and I think that's such a unique thing to think about when applying to this, is like you're getting a unique experience other than just going straight to an agency, right? Or straight to working in Congress, which I think is really, really cool, and good to hear that it's happening with you all as well. So someone has a question about finding out like which agencies or which offices are like finding out how that's a good fit for you. I know like Finn saw, and how you went through like a finalist week ops, you kind of like had the week before, I think, before finding your senator. But we'd love to see if you guys can maybe talk about your finalist experience and like how you ended up working at the agency or office you ended up at.
It's funny, at first everyone shows up and you sort of like see each other in the hotel lobby and you're like, oh, we're in competition, but it's actually not a competition. Pretty much everybody who comes to finals week will match if there's a fit, right? But you don't know that until afterwards, because it really is like a competition with like who is the best fit for both yourself and for the office. And so the office wants you to be, those offices want you to be happy too. Like I think I did something like 21 interviews that week in person, like crisscrossing the DMV, and it was crazy in the best way, you know. And so like I learned so much about government in those 5 days than I ever did in any of my civics classes or in, you know, in any of my education. And so one thing that's separate from your application to the finals week is that it doesn't matter what you wrote. I mean, like if you want to say, I want to work at NIH, like you don't have to work at NIH by the time you get to that. And so like doing something that is totally outside of your lane is actually really cool, because you sort of come in like, what am I doing here? Like, why did they want to interview me? And then 6 months in, it sort of clicks, and you know, your expertise just happens to be the only one in the room to be able to speak to that issue. So I would say keep an open mind. If you know, when you get to that stage and there's, you know, you're figuring out where to rank the offices for your own, talk to, you know, go and find those people who were fellows in that office, or and they're very happy to share that information with you.
Yeah,
I don't know if you have anything else to add for the executive. Oh yeah, sorry. I can't see if you're about to speak, but I think it'd be good for you to go next.
I think, as well as what Ben said, asking the questions and making sure they can provide what you want to get out of your fellowship experience is one way to make sure that you're going to have a match, right? If you want to explore professional development 20% of the time, ask that question. Will you allow me, you know, the ability to have that? Really think of it as a two-way interview, and not just a job interview, because I think that is how you find the best fit. Ask questions about, you know, work-life balance. Ask questions about, do you all get together for lunches some days? Or, you know, what is it that you're actually really looking for in the next year? Make sure you're asking those questions. Make sure you're being specific. I feel like my first go around, I didn't ask enough questions. So I actually put myself back in the pool for this upcoming year and made sure that I was very specific about what I was asking to who.
Yeah, that's all really great advice, and I think translates well to the congressional side too. It's kind of like when you're finding a PI in a lab, right? Everyone's culture is a little bit different, and you have to suss out the culture, and you might need to rely on the Whisper network to get you some insights. And the Whisper network here with all the fellows is very strong, so you'll be able to get that insider knowledge of each office. Congressional finalists work a little bit different. So basically, you don't fly to DC again for interviews. You do your orientation, and then afterwards, after orientation, you do a special congressional training for another week or so. And then we get what's called the book, which is a list of all of the congressional offices that want a fellow. And there's usually about 70 offerings for fellows and about 30 to 40 congressional fellows. So you're already at an advantage where you get to be kind of picky. And then you can also do something by going off book, which means that you can contact any office you want and basically say, hey, I am free labor. Would you like an oceanographer working for you for a year? And if so, what would my fellowship look like? And you kind of sell yourself to them. And then for the ones that are on book, you know, maybe multiple fellows are interviewing. Our group was really open and transparent. We all let each other know with like a shared Google Drive who was interviewing with what office. And then instead of matching on the system like you do for the exec, there's a certain day where you'll actually just get a flood of offers potentially at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. People will just start calling you, and you have, it's all like self-guided whether you want to choose or not. There's often 3 or 4 rounds of interviews, and usually the last round is with the member of Congress themselves, which is really intimidating, but you don't actually end up having to talk that much, so don't freak out too much there. But yeah, it's really cool. Like the interview process itself, you get to meet tons of the people that you're going to be emailing for the next year, because you're probably interviewing with every office that wants like an environmental fellow. And so everyone you meet with, you're probably going to be working with. And so it's a really great networking opportunity. And, in the end, I had like 4 offers, and I got to choose to work with the office I was most excited about. And that's what most fellows ended up with.
I think another question that we have is in some areas of science, you're working alone and the work is always kind of just yours. How collaborative did you feel your offices were once you were there? And then how did you feel like with the work that you're doing? And going back to like, did you feel like your scientific training helped you be successful in the role that you're doing now? Sorry, that was a little wonky way of wording it. But yeah, if you guys can take it from there.
Yeah, I can start on this one. I get asked this a lot, and I'd say in terms of the second part, did my scientific training help me with my job? Absolutely. I think less so like my training as an oceanographer, but more so my training as a scientist. And you're trained to find gaps, right? You need to figure out where new knowledge needs to happen. And that kind of gap filling exercise is very similar in policy. What bills have already been done, what work needs to be done, what are people saying, what are the next steps? And I found that translation was really easy for me. And it was really exciting to realize that I'd already been trained in this thing that people on the Hill were doing. So I think that's something you can feel really confident about if you were to come to Congress, that those skills you have in your PhD would super translate to that type of work. One thing that I found a little disappointing was actually the lack of collaboration in Congress. So most congressional offices don't really collaborate with each other. It's very different than labs collaborating with each other. I think there's a lot of collaboration within each office, but things in Congress are a lot more territorial. So if you're working on an issue, you don't necessarily want another member to be working on it with you. So that was something that was a bit different for me coming into it.
For the, at least at DOE, in my office where I've been working, we're a pretty small team, so we all work across each other's portfolios quite a bit. And I've had the ability to lead on some stuff, but no matter what, I've never been working on something just alone. So that's very different from, I feel like, what my experience with academia was, at least when you're doing your own dissertation and, doing the writing is mostly on you. Here, if we have something that we're writing, like a report or something, I don't think it would ever be on one sole person. Everyone works on the same document doing bits and parts of the research. Some people can lead more on the research and analysis. So for instance, some way that I brought my research background and my skills to this position was really in terms of data visualization and telling a story using data. That was something that I was able to kind of provide that not a lot of the others on my team had a lot of experience in. So though I'm, not doing the same type of research, it's still, really utilizing my research skills, really utilizing my data visualization skills, just now in the economic realm rather than the biological realm.
My placement was super collaborative. On the question of does your scientific expertise, does it come into play? Yes and no. I mean, I like I said, I was done talking about lung disease for a while, and I was happy to not, and learn about math and physics and astronomy, and how to translate that for a broader audience. And that obviously changed during COVID. But in the Office of Legislative and Public Affairs at NSF or OLPA, it's all about collaboration. So a lot of the blogs and infographics or whatever they wrote like serves a specific program or specific initiative within NSF. And so, the first step is to go and build a coalition. It's the same sort of thing that you do in Congress, really. Like you go find a partner who has some interest, has the same interest, and you figure out, what are the pain points. And so, like one example is I started this informational series called NSF 101. It's meant to help people at non-R1 universities apply to NSF grants, because the policies, proposals, guideline is like 90 pages, and I haven't even read all the way through. I don't know how anybody actually does, but one of the topics was how to talk to your program officer. And so I talked to a program officer and I asked, what are the top 5 things that you wish that people who reach out to you knew? And so I made it into like a BuzzFeed listicle style, and I circulated among groups of program officers, and they were super appreciative that we were, it becomes like less of like technical expertise and more like cultural expertise, and like understanding how to talk to these audiences. In our specific case, it was people who wanted to apply to grants and use this resource that they didn't know that you could talk to a program officer. So that was a big thing to me, is like learning who your audience is and then building around that interest.
Vince, that sounds amazing, and I would like to see this resource.
It lives on. Fellows are doing new topics. I'm pretty excited to see it.
We've gotten a lot of questions about what is the day-to-day like for a fellow, and I think that's going to differ no matter what agency you get placed at or anything like that. But if someone was to ask you like more day-to-day right now, or just like throughout your time as a fellow, I wonder if you guys can kind of maybe briefly speak on that.
A lot of meetings, a lot of calls, and depends on what project you're doing. But also, like, we mentioned professional development is also like networking. And so like I say, like, I'm gonna go to the Hill today and have coffee with my friend Alex. And that's part of the fellowship. It certainly is your fellowship. And so, at the beginning of the fellowship, you sort of create this this fellowship action plan. And part of it should be like, what are the skills that I want? And who in my network do I want at the end of this fellowship so I can be successful in my professional career? And so sometimes you'll get bogged down in projects that were assigned to you or given to you and you don't want. And you think about like, okay, well, what is the other part of my fellowship that is for me? So like I was always thinking about that, and to that end, fellows at like NSF is like unbiased, but NSF is a little special in that we have probably quite a bit more access to our director than most other placements do. And when we were able, I think there were 33 of us that year, and we gave a briefing to the director about the DE&I initiatives that we were all each working on, and provided some potential policy actions that they could take to improve accessibility to Black and Brown folk. Director Panchanathan called it the missing million. And so, we were trying to, we knew that was a priority of his, and so we were trying to speak that language. So that ended up being like 30–40% of my fellowship experience. But at the beginning, like no one is going to assign you work. They'll just be like, hey, what are the problems that you see? And so being a self-starter, learning how to do your own literature search in your area will help you get up to speed really quickly. But a lot of it's on you.
Yeah, the day-to-day, it can be different, I would imagine, for every office. One of the questions that I learned to ask for this round of interviews that I did was, how much of your work is proactive versus reactive? Because I feel like this year has been a lot of reactive, where you have deadlines that come the day of and you just have to react to it, which is much different from academia. So it's definitely something to, learn and grow from. And I think the day-to-day, at least for me, wasn't always the same. There's some lulls, and then there's some times where it's a lot of work. But I think, like Vince said, you really should prioritize your own professional development and growth, and don't feel like you need to say yes to everything that needs to get done if it's not something that is interesting to you or something that you think you'll grow from. Also, make sure that you're, putting time on your calendar to actually network and or do trainings that you want to do, because I think, you should not be treated as a federal government employee. Yes, you are doing some of the same work, but at the same time, I think you should really take this time to really facilitate and grow from your professional development and prioritize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, they're totally right. It's going to be very different in Congress. I think every office is different, but kind of what my day-to-day can look like is that I often take meetings with constituents, which is really gratifying. I'm a Californian, and so I love meeting with other Californians. Sometimes though you're meeting with like oil lobbyists, and that's a little bit less fun, but it's also part of the job to hear out all these other sides of policy. Sometimes you get to meet with, like I got to meet the national lab directors because they come in. You get to meet a lot of really awesome different people when you're working in Congress that come in to talk to their senators and their congressional representatives. So that's really cool. I also do a lot of writing, a lot of memo writing to the senator. So I probably write like 3 or 4 memos a week, if not more. And those are kind of summarizing policy actions that then go to the senator's desk. We also do a lot of prep for hearings. So if he's going to be testifying in a hearing that I'm staffing him at, then I'll have to prep a bunch of questions for him to ask the witnesses, read up about the witnesses, read a lot of things. Like each question you write is, a couple sentences, but it's probably like a 2-hour research project for each one. And then you hope that he can go to the, to the hearing and that he get to ask the questions. And then it's really fun when you get to staff with the senator at the hearings. Sometimes I go to meetings with the senator, and then other times I'm writing bills, which I think is really fun too, or writing letters. So it varies a lot. Some days are very proactive, some are very reactive. It's a big mix, very dynamic workplace. I feel like every day and every week I'm working on something totally different, which is really fun.
Something else to applaud too is that there's a travel and training budget for fellows, right? And so making sure that gets utilized is like a big thing. And again, you're a fellow, right? So being able to still, work, expand upon your abilities as a scientist, whether that's going to a different conference or like go to a conference that's about your discipline, right? Those are the opportunities that you also definitely want to take advantage of. But we're getting close to time, so I'm going to have one last question for y'all, and then we'll wrap up from there. But last question is basically, if you can go back in time, give yourself one piece of advice as you were applying to the fellowship, what would you tell your past self?
Oh gosh.
Job. Everybody gets a job at the end. That's like the biggest fear, right? Like, but if you're in the lab right now and you have a postdoc, you're worried about getting a job anyways, right? So, like, this is an accelerator program to teach you how to advocate for yourself in the next step. It gives you the context, the tools, the network to identify the projects that you're most passionate about, the issues that you're most passionate about, and then find the place where you can make the biggest impact for that. And so I remember having a lot of anxiety after interview week because I actually didn't get an offer after the first round, and all my friends are posting on Twitter that they got all these great placements, and like it was really stressful. And then it happened again after my as I approached the end of my second year. Everyone was getting a job, and I wasn't. But like everyone finds a way. It may not be like the Cinderella slipper, but you will eventually find a job.
Yeah, I think I would also, I always tell myself that I should stress less and then I just stress more. But I agree. I think don't stress because everyone will get placed. I think I called Christine, who's the program manager for Congressional Fellows, and I said, Christine, what if I don't get a placement? She says, well, we've never lost a single Congressional Fellow. I was like, well, what if I'm the first person? And you won't be. Like everyone gets a placement. I'd also probably tell myself that it's okay that I don't know everything about Congress, because like I think my first week when you're meeting all these past fellows, it's very stressful because people will be like, I work for this person. And you're like, oh my God, I don't even know. Are they a Democrat? Are they Republican? What state are they? Are they House, Senate? Like I had no idea what people were talking about. They'd mentioned committee names I'd never heard of. And like, it's okay. You will pick that up faster than you realize. Like you'll pick it all up and it's okay to not know when you start out. So like don't stress and try to memorize like every member of Congress or something like that.
And in terms of not stressing, I think what helped me the most was to really think of it as a two-way interview. Like you are there because they want you there. They read all of your application materials and they said, we like this person. We're inviting you to an interview. So think of it as, they should be trying to sell themselves as much as you should, or even more so. Therefore, make sure you ask the questions that you want to know and that you're going to find a good fit. And don't be too picky, I think, your first go around, right? Like if something comes up and you get invited to some place that is totally not up your alley or what you think is, going to be interesting to you, I'd say take the interview anyway, because you never know. I don't think I would have, if I were to follow my advice of, only picking of what's going to be in my research background, I don't think I would be in the position that I am right now. And I've actually learned and grew a lot from this and made some really awesome connections and been able to lead on some really important projects. So don't be too picky, ask good questions, don't be stressed because they want you.
Those are great responses, and happy this group got to hear them. Our panelists, thank you so much for being here. Really do appreciate you making the time and for letting folks hear from you all. And as you know, one of the great things about this program is that the fellows are always kind of like open to hearing from applicants. So thank you all for being here. Okay, so for some next steps, application is open until November 1st. Please visit our website to read more about the program. We'll also send you a recording of this chat in the coming days. We have a live chat coming up later this month. It's about the judicial program area. So if you're interested in hearing more about the judicial branch or working at the Federal Judicial Center, please sign up for that live chat. And if there were any questions that we weren't able to get to today, please email fellowships@AAAS.org. We're also on the internet. You can follow us on Twitter at AAAS_STPF. But that should be it. Again, any questions, feel free to reach out to that inbox. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Have a good one.